Sarah Chen stood in her grandmother's, now her, driveway, keys clutched in her hand as she took in the familiar sight of 1487 Maple Grove Lane. The Victorian house's sage green paint still looked fresh against the crisp autumn morning, exactly as it had when her grandmother had it repainted 6 months ago. A lump formed in her throat as she remembered helping Nai and I choose the color, neither of them knowing it would be their last project together. The moving truck wouldn't arrive for another hour, but Sarah had wanted to come early, to have a moment alone in the space that held so many childhood memories. As she walked up the stone path, wind chimes tinkled softly from the wraparound porch, the same ones that had serenaded her through countless summer afternoons of doing homework, while Nai and I tended her beloved butterfly garden. Inside, sunlight streamed through the bay windows, casting familiar patterns on the hardwood floors. Sarah had just set her laptop bag down when she noticed something peculiar protruding from beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace. Kneeling down, she pried up the board to find a metal cookie tin, the kind Nai had always used for her almond cookies. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside lay a collection of carefully preserved photographs showing the house and garden through different seasons and years. At the bottom was an envelope with Sarah's name written in her grandmother's elegant handwriting. The letter inside read, *, my dearest Sarah, *, if you're reading this, then the house is now yours, just as I always planned. This home has been in our family for 3 generations, and I know you'll honor its history while making it your own. But there's something you need to know about Pine Grove Estates, specifically about Patricia Henderson *. She became HOA president 5 years ago, and since then, she's driven out 3 families with her harassment. The Johnsons next door, the Paddles across the street, and poor Mr. Rodriguez, all gone because they didn't fit her vision of the neighborhood. She's tried her tactics with me too, but I've had decades of practice dealing with people like her *. In the tin, you'll find documentation of every interaction I've had with her, including her attempts to cite me for unapproved paint colors and invasive plants in my butterfly garden. The sage green paint job is approved and documented. Don't let her tell you otherwise, *. Stay strong, my little butterfly. This house is yours by right, and no amount of HOA bullying can change that *. All my love, *, Sarah was still processing the letter when her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender, p.henderson@pinegrovehoa.org. The subject line made her blood run cold. URGNT. Immediate action required. Multiple violations observed. Opening the email, Sarah was greeted by a wall of text filled with bold and underlined passages. Dear new resident, it has come to my attention that the property at 1487 Maple Grove Lane is in violation of multiple HOA bylaws, including unauthorized paint color must be approved by board, decorative items visible from street, wind chimes, overgrown vegetation in front garden area, unapproved mailbox design. As HOA president, I must insist on immediate remediation of these issues. You have 48 hours to 1. Submit paint color change request. 2. Remove all unauthorized decorations. 3. Schedule professional landscaping service. 4. Replace mailbox with approved model. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100 per violation. Regards, Patricia Henderson, President, Pine Grove Estates HOA. Sarah glanced at the timestamp, 7:43 a.m. She'd officially owned the house for exactly 13 minutes. Through the front window, she spotted a woman in a crisp beige pantsuit power walking past the house, phone raised as she photographed Sarah's property. The woman's gaze met Sarah's through the window, and instead of looking embarrassed at being caught, she lifted her phone higher and took another picture. Sarah looked down at her grandmother's letter, then back at the email. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she reached for the tin of documentation. Nai had always taught her to come prepared for a battle, and it seemed this one was already beginning. 3 weeks after moving in, Sarah stood in her backyard at dawn, coffee mug warming her hands as she surveyed her grandmother's butterfly garden. The morning dew caught the sunrise, making the native wildflowers sparkle. She'd spent the weekend carefully removing weeds and documenting each plant species, discovering that Nai Nai had cultivated several rare native varieties that were essential to local butterfly populations. Her phone buzzed. Another email from Patricia Henderson. Sarah had counted. This made 23 violation notices in 3 weeks. She'd started a spreadsheet to track them, following her brother James' advice to document everything. Today's complaint was about unauthorized landscape modifications and potential pest-attracting vegetation. A sharp voice cut through the morning calm. "Excuse me. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Sarah turned to find Patricia Henderson standing at the garden gate, designer handbag clutched in one hand, phone raised in the other. She wore pristine white capri pants and a pastel polo shirt with HOA praise ident embroidered on the chest. "Good morning, Patricia," Sarah replied evenly, taking a deliberate sip of coffee. "I'm maintaining my grandmother's registered butterfly sanctuary. Would you like to see the certification?" Patricia's perfectly lined lips tightened. "That was your grandmother's eccentricity. This is a new era for Pine Grove Estates. We have standards to maintain." "The garden is actually protected," Sarah said, retrieving a folder from her garden workspace. "Not only did the previous HOA board approve it in writing, but it's also registered with the National Wildlife Federation as a certified monarch way station. Here's the documentation." She held out the papers, but Patricia was already furiously typing on her phone. "I'm live streaming this for the HOA Facebook group," she announced. "Our members need to see the kind of degradation you're bringing to our community. Those are weeds, and they're probably attracting rats." Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. "These are native milkweed plants, Patricia. They're essential for monarch butterfly survival. The orange flowers you're calling weeds? That's butterfly weed, and it's been here for 30 years. Well, not anymore." Patricia's voice took on a triumphant edge. "I've already called Green and Clean Landscaping. They'll be here in 20 minutes to restore this area to HOA standards." Sarah's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "Any unauthorized person who enters my property or damages these plants will be charged with trespassing and destruction of protected species. I've already filed the paperwork with the county." Patricia's face flushed red. "You can't possibly." "I can, and I did," Sarah interrupted, pulling up an email on her phone. "Here's the confirmation from the County Environmental Protection Office. They're quite interested in preserving one of the last certified butterfly sanctuaries in the region. Would you like me to forward you their contact information? They specifically asked to be notified of any threats to the garden." For a moment, Patricia stood speechless, her phone still recording. In the distance, a truck's engine rumbled. "Cancel the job," Patricia barked into her phone, turning away. "The situation is temporarily delayed." She spun back to face Sarah. "This isn't over. That garden is an eyesore, and eyesores affect property values. You'll see exactly what I mean when you get this month's HOA assessment." As Patricia stormed away, Sarah noticed movement at several neighboring windows. Mrs. Patel from across the street gave her a subtle thumbs up. Mr. Rodriguez, tending his own garden next door, called out, "Your abuela would be proud, chica. She stood up to that bruta too." Sarah smiled, but her relief was short-lived. That afternoon, while she was at work, her security camera captured a green and clean truck pulling up to her curb. 2 workers in uniforms emerged carrying backpack sprayers. They moved along the property line, and a fine mist drifted over her grandmother's precious flowers. By sunset, the edges of the butterfly garden had started to wilt. The war, it seemed, had only just begun. Sarah's morning routine had evolved since moving in. Coffee, garden inspection, and now, checking Patricia's Pine Grove Estates Real Neighborhood Watch Facebook group. Today's post made her nearly spill her coffee. Urgent safety ali art. Suspicious activity at 1487 Maple Grove Lane. Unknown vehicles spotted at late hours. Possible illegal business or worse. Multiple violations documented. See photo album. Chen property degradation. Day 37. All residents advised to avoid area after dark. Security cameras Staron July recommended facing this property. The post had 47 comments. Sarah scrolled through them, her hands shaking. So sad what's happening to old Mrs. Chen's beautiful home. Those people always bring down property values. My daughter said she saw someone in the garden at midnight with flashlights. Sarah checked her security footage from the previous night. The only flashlights belonged to Patricia herself, carefully measuring Sarah's grass with a ruler at 11:43 p.m., her designer handbag swinging as she crept along the property line. A knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Rodriguez, the retired judge from 2 doors down, stood on her porch holding a laptop. "Mijita, you need to see this. I've been documenting Patricia's harassment since she drove my son's family out 3 years ago." Over tea in Sarah's kitchen, Mrs. Rodriguez opened a meticulously organized digital folder. Patricia has a pattern. First, she isolates her targets on social media. Then come the false complaints. Finally, she finds ways to levy special assessments until they can't afford to stay. The folder contained screenshots, emails, and videos spanning 5 years. The Paddles, accused of cooking odors decreasing property values, targeted with $500 monthly cultural integration fees. The Johnsons, young black couple, photographers working from home. Patricia claimed their home studio violated zoning laws, hit with $750 monthly commercial activity penalties. The Rodriguez family, 3 generations living together. Patricia cited occupancy violations, charged $1,000 monthly for excessive resource usage. But here's what she doesn't know. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, pulling out a USB drive. "I taught constitutional law for 30 years. Everything's admissible in court." Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. Patricia had posted again. Breaking. Evidence of illegal wildlife trafficking. Butterfly sanctuary being used as cover for exotic animal trade. Security footage shows suspicious containers being moved at night. Environmental Health Department must investigate. The suspicious containers were Sarah's recycling bins. She checked her calendar. It was recycling pickup night. A new email popped up from an unfamiliar address. jacksonfamily2019@gmail.com. "Dear Sarah, we were forced out of Pine Grove 2 years ago. Patricia's tactics damaged our credit and nearly cost me my job. We're not the only ones. There's a whole group of us who've documented everything. Would you like to connect?" Sarah's security system pinged. Patricia was outside again, this time photographing Sarah's windows. Through the camera feed, Sarah watched as Patricia carefully arranged some scattered trash near Sarah's garden gate, trash that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago, and began photographing it. "Got you," Sarah whispered, saving the footage. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed her hand. Patricia thinks she's playing chess, but she doesn't realize she's already in checkmate. "Your brother called me yesterday. We're building a case." Sarah's laptop chimed with another notification. Patricia had created a new Facebook poll. "Vote no go. Should Pine Grove Estates enforce immediate eviction for suspected criminal activity, dangerous wildlife attractions, unauthorized business operations, cultural incompatibility?" The last option made Sarah's blood boil. But as she watched Patricia meticulously staging more evidence through her security feed, a plan began forming. Her grandmother hadn't just left her a house, she'd left her a legacy of standing up to bullies. She opened her email and began composing a message to the Jackson family. "I'd love to connect, and I think it's time we all share our stories." Sarah hadn't planned on hosting an educational butterfly garden tour, but when Ms. Thompson, her old 3rd-grade teacher, reached out about bringing her class, she couldn't refuse. Now, watching 28 excited children carefully planting milkweed seedlings, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "And remember," Sarah explained, kneeling beside a wide-eyed girl, "each monarch butterfly can travel up to 3,000 miles during migration. That's why way stations like this garden are so important. They're like little butterfly hotels." The children's delighted giggles were interrupted by the sharp click of heels on pavement. Patricia Henderson stood at the garden gate, phone raised, her face a mask of outrage. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Patricia's voice carried across the garden. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a petting zoo. I'm calling the police." Ms. Thompson stepped forward, her gentle demeanor unchanged. "Patricia, these are your grandson Tommy's classmates. We're doing our endangered species unit and I don't care if they're the president's children, Patricia snapped, already dialing. This is an unauthorized gathering and a clear violation of. Actually, a new voice interrupted. It's a registered educational activity. Mr. Fitzgerald, the retired city planner from across the street, approached with a stack of papers. I took the liberty of checking the bylaws. Article 7, Section 3 specifically permits educational and environmental conservation activities, added in 1992 when Pine Grove received its Green Community designation. Patricia's face reddened. That's not. You can't possibly. She spun around, nearly colliding with Mrs. Patel, who was carrying a tray of homemade butterfly-shaped cookies for the children. Emergency HOA meeting, tonight, 7 p.m. sharp, Patricia announced, storming away while furiously typing on her phone. Sarah spent the afternoon preparing for the meeting, reviewing her grandmother's documentation and the growing file of evidence from other residents. At 6:55 p.m., she walked into the community center to find it packed. Patricia stood at the podium, laptop connected to the projector. Property values. Patricia began without preamble, clicking to her first slide. That's what we're here to discuss. Thanks to certain elements in our community, Pine Grove Estates is facing a crisis. The presentation was clearly designed to shock, graphs showing imaginary property value declines, photos of Sarah's house taken from unflattering angles, and even a slide suggesting correlation between butterfly gardens and increased crime rates. But as Patricia clicked to a particularly grainy photo of Sarah's garden, labeled CUSPTT Drudge Cultivation Area, something unexpected happened. That's my prize-winning echinacea, Mrs. Lee, the 82-year-old master gardener, called out. I gave those plants to Grace Chen myself. They're purple coneflowers, Patricia, not marijuana. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Patricia clicked frantically to her next slide, but the damage was done. Speaking of plants, Mr. Rodriguez stood up. Would you like to explain why your landscaping crew was spreading herbicide on my tomatoes last week? I have it on video. More residents began standing. You cited me for an unapproved mailbox, the same model you have. My unauthorized paint color is the one you recommended last year. You tried to fine me for having a mezuzah on my door. Sarah watched in amazement as years of pent-up frustration poured out. Even Patricia's most loyal supporters looked uncomfortable. Order. I demand order, Patricia shrieked, but her voice was drowned out by Ms. Thompson's raised hand. I move to add an item to tonight's agenda, the teacher announced calmly. A vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership. Patricia's face went from red to purple. You can't. This isn't. She grabbed her phone. I'm calling the police. This meeting is becoming dangerous. Go ahead, Sarah said quietly, standing. My brother would love to hear about another false report. The room fell silent as Patricia's phone slipped from her shaking fingers, clattering to the floor. In the back of the room, Tommy Henderson raised his hand. Grandma, he asked innocently, why do you hate butterflies so much? The morning after the HOA meeting, Sarah arrived home from her morning coffee run to find 3 police cruisers parked outside her house. Officers were stringing yellow caution tape around her butterfly garden, while Patricia Henderson stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. That's her. Patricia's voice cracked with obviously fake distress. She's running an illegal business, endangering children, and I have proof she's dealing drugs from that so-called butterfly sanctuary. A tall figure in a sheriff's uniform emerged from one of the cruisers, and Patricia's performance intensified. Sheriff Thompson, thank goodness you're here personally. This situation requires immediate action. I demand an arrest. Sarah couldn't help but smile as her brother James approached, his face professionally neutral. She remembered him practicing that exact expression in the mirror during his academy days. Mrs. Henderson, James began, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority. We take all reports seriously. Could you please walk me through your evidence? Patricia practically bounced with vindictive excitement. First, she's running unauthorized tours. I have photos of children being led into that wildlife death trap. Second, there are suspicious late-night activities. I've documented everything in this binder. And third, she paused dramatically, I have photographic evidence of drug paraphernalia in the garden. James accepted the binder, flipping through it with methodical care. These photos of suspicious nighttime activity, what time were they taken? Between 11 p.m. and midnight on multiple occasions, Patricia declared triumphantly. And you took these photos yourself? Of course, as HOA president, it's my duty to. So you're admitting to trespassing and stalking? James interrupted, his tone still professionally calm. Because according to the timestamps on these photos, you were on private property without permission after hours. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not. I was conducting official HOA business. And these photos of drug paraphernalia? James continued, turning the binder sideways. They appear to be garden stakes and butterfly feeders. My department actually helped certify this sanctuary last month. Would you like to see the paperwork? But the children, Patricia sputtered. She's endangering. You mean the third-grade field trip that was approved by the school board? Sarah finally spoke up, pulling out her phone. I have all the permission slips right here. The teachers thought it would be perfect timing since they're studying monarch migration patterns. James turned to the other officers. Stand down, gentlemen. No crime here. He then fixed Patricia with a stern look. Mrs. Henderson, would you like to know what we do have evidence of? He pulled out his own folder. 16 false police reports in the past 3 years. Multiple complaints of harassment from former residents. Documentation of selective HOA enforcement based on racial and ethnic backgrounds. Photographic evidence of you trespassing on multiple properties. And now, a false report about my sister's property. Patricia's face went chalk white. Your sister? Yes, Mrs. Henderson. Sarah is my sister, but that's not why I'm here. He gestured to this folder. I'm here because we've been building a case about your pattern of harassment for months. The DA is particularly interested in the racial discrimination angle. You can't prove anything. Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. I'm protecting property values. I'm maintaining standards. You're leaving? Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cut through the commotion. She stood at the edge of the garden, cell phone raised. And this time I'm recording everything, for the lawsuit. Patricia looked around wildly, suddenly noticing the faces in every window, the phones recording from every angle. Her carefully constructed facade of authority crumbled as she realized the tables had finally turned. This isn't over, she hissed. Her voice quavered. Actually, Mrs. Henderson, James replied. I think it is. Now, would you like to make a statement about those false police reports? Or should we continue this conversation down at the station? Sarah jolted awake at 3:17 a.m. to multiple alerts from her security system. The notification showed movement in the butterfly garden, accompanied by hushed voices. Her heart racing, she pulled up the live feed on her tablet. The night vision camera revealed 2 figures moving through her garden. One was unmistakably Patricia Henderson, still wearing her designer pantsuit from the previous day's confrontation. The other, Sarah's breath caught, was Tommy, Patricia's teenage grandson, looking uncomfortable as he followed his grandmother's instructions. Hurry up, Patricia's whispered voice came through clearly on the audio. Plant them by the butterfly feeders. Make it look natural. Grandma, this is wrong, Tommy protested weakly. Ms. Chen's garden helps my class study. Don't be naive, Patricia snapped. This is about protecting our community. That woman and her brother think they've won, but once the drug task force finds these, she pulled something from her designer bag. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized small plastic bags and what appeared to be drug paraphernalia. Patricia was actually planting evidence in her garden, but Patricia had missed something crucial in her desperation. 2 weeks ago, Sarah had installed a sophisticated wildlife camera system to monitor the butterfly migration patterns. The high-definition infrared cameras were perfectly positioned to capture every detail of Patricia's attempted frame-up. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from her brother James. Getting alerts from your security system. Don't intervene. Officers en route. Evidence gathering in progress. She watched as Patricia directed Tommy to scatter more items near the milkweed plants. The teenager's reluctance was evident in every movement. Grandma, Tommy tried again. Everyone knows Ms. Chen helps the school. She let us release the butterflies we raised in science class. Shut up and plant the evidence. Patricia's whisper turned into a harsh hiss. This is what we have to do to protect our property values from people like her. People like her? Tommy's voice grew stronger. You mean people who help others? People who teach kids about nature? People who actually follow the rules while you break them? Patricia grabbed his arm. Don't you dare talk back to me. I've spent years protecting this neighborhood from undesirables, and I won't let some Chinese girl and her cop brother destroy everything I've built. The racism in Patricia's statement hung in the air like poison. Tommy yanked his arm away, dropping the remaining items. I'm recording all of this, Grandma, he said quietly, pulling out his phone. Have been since we left the house. Because Ms. Chen's brother told me what you did to the Paddles, and the Rodriguezes and all the others. He said sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to family. Patricia's face, clearly visible in the infrared light, contorted with rage. You little traitor. Give me that phone. As she lunged for Tommy, floodlights suddenly illuminated the garden. Police cruisers silently pulled up, their lights off, blocking both ends of the street. Patricia Henderson. James's voice boomed through a megaphone. Step away from the minor and put your hands where we can see them. You are being arrested for attempted evidence tampering, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Patricia spun around wildly, designer bag swinging. This is harassment. I'm the victim here. I was just checking on suspicious activity. While trespassing at 3 a.m., Officer Rodriguez, Mr. Rodriguez's daughter and newest member of the force, stepped forward with handcuffs. Everything's on camera, Mrs. Henderson. Multiple cameras, actually. Would you like to explain the contents of your bag to us? As Patricia was led away, still protesting, Tommy remained in the garden, shaking. Sarah, now on her porch, called out softly, Would you like some hot chocolate, Tommy? I think we both could use some. The teenager nodded, wiping his eyes. I'm sorry about my grandma, Ms. Chen. I didn't know how bad it was until. You did the right thing, Sarah assured him. That takes real courage. From her security feed, Sarah could see lights coming on in neighboring houses. The community was waking up to witness Patricia Henderson's final performance, this time without a script, without power, and without anywhere to hide. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., but by 6:30, the community center was already packed. Patricia Henderson had been released on bail that morning, and rumors spread that she'd called this meeting to present evidence of a vast conspiracy against her. Sarah sat in the front row between Mrs. Rodriguez and Tommy, who had chosen to stay with his aunt for a few days while his parents processed everything. The teenager hadn't stopped apologizing, but Sarah made sure he understood that his bravery had helped expose years of injustice. At exactly 7 p.m., Patricia burst through the doors, her usual perfectly coiffed appearance notably disheveled. Her designer suit was wrinkled, and her hands shook as she connected her laptop to the projector. Before anyone says anything, Patricia announced, her voice brittle, I have proof of the criminal conspiracy against me. Everything that happened last night was a setup. The projector flickered to life, showing a series of grainy photos taken from her night vision surveillance cameras. As you can see, suspicious activity has been ongoing at 1487 Maple Grove Lane, and last night I caught them in the act. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand. In the act of what, exactly? Drug trafficking. Patricia clicked through her slides rapidly. These photos clearly show your grandson following your instructions to plant false evidence. Sarah's brother James stepped out from the back of the room, now in civilian clothes. Or would you like to see the HD footage from multiple angles first? Patricia's finger froze over her laptop. That's not. This is harassment. Actually, a new voice spoke up, this is evidence. A woman in a crisp suit stood up from the middle row. Diana Martinez, District Attorney's Office. We've been building a case about systematic harassment and discrimination in Pine Grove Estates for months. The DA clicked a small remote, and a different presentation appeared on the screen. Let's talk about financial records, Mrs. Henderson. Color drained from Patricia's face as spreadsheets appeared on screen. Our forensic accountants have been very interested in the pattern of special assessments you've levied against certain residents, the DA continued, particularly how those funds were diverted to personal accounts under your control. That's a lie, Patricia shrieked. I've done nothing but protect property values. By embezzling over $200,000 in HOA funds, Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, holding a thick folder. As a former judge, I found the paper trail fascinating, especially the offshore account in the Caymans. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Tommy's parents, sitting in the back, looked ill. But wait, the DA smiled grimly, there's more. Let's discuss the pattern of harassment based on race and ethnicity. Mrs. Patel, would you like to share the emails? Mrs. Patel stood, her voice clear and strong. 2 years ago, Patricia told me my ethnic cooking was lowering property values. She created a special assessment for air quality control that only applied to homes cooking exotic foods. I have all the emails. More residents stood up, each with their own documentation. Targeted harassment of minority homeowners, selective enforcement of HOA rules, false police reports against families of color, manipulated property evaluations, forged compliance violations. Patricia's composure cracked completely. You're all ungrateful. I maintained standards. I kept the wrong element out. I protected. You protected nothing but your own prejudices. Tommy spoke up, his young voice cutting through her rant. And you tried to make me help you hurt innocent people. The room fell silent as Patricia stared at her grandson, mouth working soundlessly. Mrs. Henderson, the DA said quietly, would you like to surrender yourself now, or should we do this the hard way? Patricia looked around wildly, seeing nothing but faces hardened by years of her abuse. Her phone slipped from trembling fingers, clattering to the floor just as red and blue lights began flashing through the community center windows. I did it all for you, she screamed at the assembled residents, for property values, for community standards, for hate, Sarah finished softly, and that's why you lost.